We've just had a wonderful discussion with Dr. Amit Anand on the mystery and mastery of breath. I think he took away a lot of the mystery and has helped us to have mastery over our breathing, our consciousness, and most of all, how we can co create with one another so that we bring about a world that benefits all. I invite you to listen and to ask any question that you may have about breath, about sleep, and about anything related to these aspects, because we're going to have Amit back again. So please do give your suggestions.
Thank you so much, Meenakshi. It's a privilege and it's a joy to be with you today. I'm in Boston. It's snowing outside, and you're in sunny Florida, so there's a little pang of envy over here. But it's wonderful to talk breath, share breath, because that's what we do as human beings on this planet. And I am also researching breath quite a bit, based in Boston as a physician, as a clinician, as a researcher, and now as a teacher of breathwork. So, really delighted to spend some time with you today.
Yeah, this is such a wonderful, coincidence that you've done two things which may seem so separate, and yet you are a master of both, if I may say so. I'm going to read out your bio so that our listeners know the treat that we are all in for. Amit Anand, MD, is a board certified practitioner of pulmonary critical care and sleep medicine at Beth Israel Lahey. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Lahey Health Care System in Boston, Massachusetts. He obtained his MBBS degree at the SET GS Medical College in Bombay, India in 1989. He proceeded to complete his internship and residency in internal medicine, as well as a fellowship in sleep medicine at the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in Boston, Massachusetts. He also trained as a fellow in pulmonary and critical care medicine at the Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. These are teaching affiliated hospitals of Harvard Medical School. He completed a master's in clinical investigation from the combined MIT Harvard Medical School program. He has held academic positions at Harvard Medical School, Tufts University, and Boston University School of Medicine for more than 25 years. Amit Anand is an instructor in primordial sound meditation of the Chopra Center for Wellbeing and a Yoga Alliance teacher of the Amrit Yoga method. He has learned from and worked with many preeminent yoga teachers in the world. He is particularly interested in the doctrine of pranayama, which is breath extension and control techniques, as taught at the Kaivalya Dham Institute of Yoga in Lonavala, India, because of his background in pulmonary and sleep physiology. And the latest information that we have received is that he is the founder of breathonance.com and also of, oh, that is pranayamarx.com, right?
Yes.
Wow. For me, I want to put my personal note in here because uh, maybe 10 or 11 or 12 years ago, actually, it has to start with something recent. Recently, somebody asked me, Meenakshi, once in your home, we had a lovely yoga class with a doctor. He had come and he had taught us, and we had loved it. When is he coming back? Why hasn't he come back again? So, Amit, people remember you. It's not like they haven't been to other yoga classes, but something about the way you teach and the way you did it with us that day. And something which doesn't come up in your bio, but I know it will come out as you speak, is your huge compassion. People feel so much at ease with you In many ways, I think I don't know if watchers can see it, but you're so tall, and shorter people like me. Sometimes you can feel, oh my gosh, will I be able to do what he's asking me to do? So many ways and so many things, but you made people feel so much at ease. And recently, when I've started doing your breatherness, it makes me feel so wonderful just to hear your voice and how you are guiding, and the amazing thing that you're going to tell us about why it is breatherness. But before that, I'm going to ask you a personal question from you. How did these two things come together for you? The two P's, the pulmonary, being a pulmonologist, and the pranayam. How did it come together?
Yeah, so it's a long journey for me. I was born in a family in India where yoga was all around me. As a young child, I would see my grandfather standing on his head when he was 80, and I was mesmerized. And I would say, Baba, what are you doing? And he said, it's less about me standing on my head, it's more about me being happy and healthy. So don't mistake the posture for the intention. And he lived a long life, a healthy life. My mother was a doctor. I was born into a family of physicians. I trained in Bombay, now called Mumbai. And even through medical school, the one thing that really struck with me was when I saw people who couldn't breathe or who had difficulty with their breathing. And I worked in a tetanus ward. Now, tetanus is not a disease that you will see in the US or in the Western world because most people are vaccinated. But in certain parts of the world, it's a threatening disease where the toxin from the tetanus infection consumes the body such that you go into tight spasm, but you are fully awake as your body is contorting in pain, and patients can't breathe. And when you would take them through to the other side and they would recover from their illness, the first thing that they would tell me is, to take a deep breath again. How welcoming and how peaceful and how magical it feels. So I was always fascinated with breath. Fast forward, I come to the US, I'm training in Boston, and I enter the world of pulmonary disease, critical care medicine, and then sleep physiology, all of which are really linked by breathing as a practice. All my subspecialty training is really glued by breath. But the one thing that struck me, going through medical school, was that I was never taught how to breathe. I was taught to treat people who couldn't breathe, to investigate disease of breath, research breath. But when people were wanting to learn how to breathe, my education was bereft of that learning, that teaching. And yet, it's the first thing we do when we are born into this world, as it will be the last thing we do when we leave, from that first breath to that last gasp. And if we are fortunate to live to 80 years of age, we would have taken about 672,678,000 breaths in a lifespan. In a lifespan. And yet the human being is not aware of breathing because it sits in the backdrop. Then, when you look at the yoga side, which was again a part of my upbringing, and I was fascinated with this, there's a whole doctrine which teaches breathwork or pranayama as a tradition to help not only the body settle, but more importantly, the mind settle. And when you come into a state of yoga or yoking together of the body, breath, mind, and spirit, then health naturally happens as a byproduct of being in that state, which is what my grandfather used to tell me. And so I got fascinated with pranayam. I was teaching yoga, I was practicing and teaching meditation, but there was something again remiss in that world for me, and it was breath. And when I started to investigate, study breath, research breath, it kind of completed the whole circle for me because it then allowed me to use some of this work in the clinical realm. and teach my patients how to breathe, because they used to keep asking me that question. How do I breathe, doctor? How do I breathe? And now I had the answer. And obviously, with what we've all collectively experienced with, the last 5 years as a human species with the pandemic, where we couldn't breathe, it became even more relevant to put this into play. There was even more of an urgency. So I started to teach my students, my fellows, my nurses, my respiratory therapists, but more importantly, my patients as they were recovering from COVID-19. And it would help them in some small way to get back home healthier and happier. So that kind of, completes the journey for me in terms of pulmonary disease and pranayama and how they've kind of merged together in my life. And now, the more I teach this, the more I realize that everyone wants to learn about it. So that's been the impetus for the program we've developed online with pranayama or breathwork practices, but set to musical melodies or rhythms to kind of synergize their individual powers and make them exponential.
You know, there's so many ways I want to go from here, but the first one that's coming to my mind is that first breath. And as you were speaking, I had first thought I'm going to ask about that first breath, but now I'm understanding that even the first breath is not easy, Amit, isn't it? Like people, like in the olden days, they used to say they tap the baby's bottom. Now they do different things to make the baby take the first breath. So, can we say that breath is not really very natural for humans? What are we saying here? Why is it that a baby doesn't immediately start breathing?
So the baby will start to breathe as soon as it leaves the womb. It has to be nudged. And that cry on the exhale is the release, of its own breath from being confined in amniotic fluid now to the act of exchanging gas, for its own existence, because now the cord has been cut. So the baby needs to breathe. But uh, for most, even though it's, visceral cry, it's the happiest visceral cry that you will hear when your baby is born, and you will never forget it. As equally tough as it is for some of us who lose parents to watch them take their last gasp. So, yes, there is a cry, yes, there is a gasp, but then in between, it goes silent. And most people don't feel that they're breathing, appropriately so, because it's one of those amazing physiologic functions that just happens in the backdrop of life. It just happens and happens and happens. But it's the only visceral function that the human being can take control of. You can control the breath at any time to manipulate the experience that is energy within the body, that is prana, or whatever you want to call it, chi, or spirit, or soul. And when you do that, then you're using breath as an instrument to enliven the human experience. And that's when it really becomes magical. But you don't feel that because most people don't have diseases of the breath. But speak to someone who's diseased or discomforted by their breathing, and they will hunger for this kind of practice.
Yeah, so that means, in fact, when the baby takes the first breath, like you said, the mother gives that sigh of relief, which is such a beautiful that it's the first sound actually both of them make. One seems to be crying and another is crying with joy, but maybe hopefully they're both crying with joy. But I still want to know, why is it that we don't naturally breathe properly? Or would you say that most people do naturally breathe in a proper way?
I would say no. Having watched people both in the East and in the West, over time, just in terms of the volume of breath, the rapidity which they breathe, the posture which there is. Most people are now sitting on screens, crouched over, or looking at a screen, even when they are driving or walking. Um, all of these things confine. the act of breathing. But most people are not even aware of it. But breath is a natural byproduct of things that we do in our life as much as it is a byproduct of our metabolic milieu. So temperature will change it. Oxygen and CO2 will change it. Blood pressure will change it. Our emotional state will change it. And stress is a big thing nowadays, right? I mean, most people, by virtue of the lives that they lead, the hours that they keep, the lack of sleep that they experience, it all results in, a hyper vigilant state, a hyper aroused state, where breathing frequency increases, breath volume decreases, and this results in unhealthy breathing patterns where, one is only breathing from the nipple up as opposed to the diaphragm down. And in and of itself, it perpetuates, a state of stress and anxiety, which further compounds the whole situation. So, to answer your question, I don't think people appreciate the value of their breath. And certainly, having observed not only in the clinical realm, but also in other realms of existence, whether it's in the athlete space or even when it's in the yoga space, people don't know really how to breathe to settle into the posture or to settle into the athletic endeavor. And that's, I think, where this work becomes even more relevant, is that for a few minutes each day, why not take control? And through my own personal experience, having used pranayama to sort of overcome my own issues with asthma, I can speak to it with conviction. And I can also tell you that if you become breath aware, you will want to remain breath aware.
Yeah, I agree. This is so interesting you said that because when in the beginning, when I started doing breathwork, I would go to the garden and sit in a peaceful place and just listen to your voice and follow along the directions with the beautiful music. And then one day I found that even when I'm in the shower, I feel like saying, why don't I just start doing one of the breaths? And actually, I was going to ask you if that is okay to do. Of course, you have to be careful the water doesn't get into your nose, but at least you can do Brahmari, right?
Yeah, no, totally. It's a gift that keeps giving.
Yeah.
So, even though the practice is very soothing or powerful or exhilarating or calming, depending on what you're doing, it starts to resonate outside of it. And that's really what we do all of this for, right? It's not to have some kind of peak experience in the practice. If it happens, it's great, but it's to fulfill our lives in a meaningful way, to make us healthier and happier. And you will very soon find that some of these practices, oh, I was doing it. Was I aware? And suddenly your posture changes, suddenly your breath volume changes. And it becomes a lot more fun when you do it outside of it, because that means they're starting to resonate outside of the practice. And that's really what breathance is. It's breath with resonant rhythms when put together, set to music, but it starts to resonate outside of it. There's resonance of breathance outside of the practice.
I love that because I remember now that I had asked you, Amit, when will I know I can go to the next breath? And you said, will you tell me? You said, you will know. You were right. That's so beautiful because with the breath, not only is the breathing becoming good in a physical way, but the consciousness is expanding and self-awareness. That is so beautiful. I mean, it's actually when you say it, it seems, yeah, obvious, but it wasn't obvious in the beginning. I felt you would have to tell me now, Meenakshi, go to the next step. But one of the things I also realized why we don't breathe properly, and I would say it's fashion, social pressure, or whatever. We are often told, keep your belly in and don't let it show. Nobody wants a big belly. So we start breathing just from the chest and not from the belly. And as someone recently reminded me, when you're breathing from the belly, it's not like the air is going into your belly. It's just that your diaphragm, like you were mentioning, it's able to expand. But if we can take now, about the Brahmari, you were talking about stress, because that is one of the listener questions. that how can we breathe for stress? There are many reasons why people may be feeling stressed. And do you think this is a good time for you to show us how we can breathe? Talk to.
Sure, sure, absolutely. So, as I said, stress is the number one killer, not only in the West, but even more so in the East. And I know there are many, many reasons for, disease and illness all across the globe. But stress really is the number one. And these are choices that we volitionally or subliminally make that perpetuate a physiology of arousal. So the more stressed you are, the more aroused you become, the more vigilant you become, which, when in small doses, it's actually healthy for the human species. The fight or flight response is a survival mechanism, for most of us. But when it starts to become exaggerated, when you're either in a stressful situation for too long or you've left the stressful situation, but the resulting physiology has not settled back into a state of calm, then that's going to have consequences in every aspect of your life, whether it's physiologically in terms of heart rate variability, blood pressure, your breathing, your gas exchange, your gut health, your cognitive health, and also your sleeping health. Because most people will develop issues with insomnia by virtue of heightened stress. And when you introduce a practice like this, whether it's mindfulness, whether it's meditation, whether it's breath work or pranayama, what you are doing is you are attenuating the stress response. So you go from the axis being shifted towards the sympathetic side, which is fight or flight. You bring it sort of more in balance towards the parasympathetic side, which is more calm, recuperative, cooling, restorative. And you start to feel that settling in your physiology very quickly, but more importantly, you're in your emotional state of being. So that vigilance starts to settle. So all of pranayama is really about becoming a slow, large volume, upright, nostril breather. That's really, in a nutshell, if I had to put it in one sentence, what breath work is about. Slow frequency, large volume, upright posture spine, nose over mouth dominance. And any practice that espouses to that, and there are many traditions online, whether it's 478 or Buteyko or Wim Hof, or there's so many traditions out there, but they all take root in this wisdom tradition called pranayama, which is one of the 8 limbs of the Ashtanga tradition of yoga in India. But they all espouse to making you a slow, upright, large volume nose breather. And when you do that, everything changes. When you become a resonant frequency breather, so your breath rate becomes somewhere between 4 to 7 breaths a minute, the volume has to go up. And as a result of this practice, everything changes. Blood pressure drops, heart rate drops, oxygen saturations go up, CO2 levels equilibrate, and you have emotional calm. So it's about using breath as an instrument to create that pattern of physiology by attenuating the stress response. And there are many practices out there, but when you use the sound of breath on the exhale portion of the breath, and Brahmari is one of them, the buzzing bee breath is one of them, you do this for about 3, 4, 5 minutes, and then suddenly you leave the practice and you feel that. You literally feel that. And that's an important part of the practice, is also coming back into your feeling body, because we are very much stuck in our thinking body or in our sensed state of being in our physical body, but we don't feel. We tend to numb feeling. So this allows for that feeling value to come alive. And breath work is the way to do it. So there are many traditions out there in pranayama itself, but Ujjayi and Brahmari practices, which emphasize the sound of the breath on the exhale, will get you there more consistently and quickly.
Can you demonstrate that for us right now and lead us into the
Sure.
meditation?
Sure.
Okay.
So we'll do a practice. It's called Brahmari pranayam. It's called the buzzing bee breath. And on this practice, what you're doing is you're going to generate a hum on the exhale. The hum will be uniform from the beginning to the end of the exhale. The exhale, believe it or not, will last anywhere between 8 to 10 seconds. You will follow this up with a nostril inhale. So nose in is silent, but the nose out is a hum. And then you choose a pitch or a tone that is comfortable for you. So it doesn't have to be too low or too high, whatever is comfortable for you. And as you hum, you will seal your ears and you will pad the closed eyes with the tips of your fingers very gently. And it looks and sounds like this. I'll do it the one time and then we'll do it to music. So you breathe out with vigor until your breath starts to lose steam. Then you let the rest of the breath complete quietly. And then you take the next breath in. And then you keep repeating the cycle. Nostril in, nostril out with the hum. 5 seconds in, 10 seconds out. But now we are going to use music as our metronome. All right? For the first 2 minutes, or the first 1 minute, you can seal the ears and pad the eyes. And then after that, once you get into a rhythm, bring your hands down and just do it with the eyes closed, but keep humming and let the music guide you. So I'll play a track to one of these practices so that we can all do this together. This is called Brahmari pranayam. You can hear this? Close the eyes. Nostril in, nostril out. Getting the hands ready, sealing the ears, padding the eyes, which are closed. Let's generate the hum. Inhale, nose. Inhale, nose. Inhale, nose. Inhale, nose. Hum. Inhale, nose. With vigor. Bring the hands down, keep the eyes closed, continue. Inhale, nose. Inhale, nose. Hum with vigor. Feel it. And release from the practice. Just sit quietly. We'll do it for a few more breaths. Inhale nose. Hum. More breaths. Releasing from the practice, just watching the body, feeling the body, watching the mind, letting it happen rather than making it happen. And as you feel ready, just gently open the eyes. So that's Brahmari. It's the buzzing bee breath. What you were doing over there without realizing it was that you were breathing at 4 breaths a minute. It was a 5-second in, a 10-second out, a 15-second breath cycle. For some of us, it could have been a little challenging, but in time, that rhythm really takes over and makes it very easy when you hum on the exhale. And as you develop this, you're in resonant frequency breathing. Everything settles. The experience once you come out of it is one of clarity, but rest at the same time. So restful alertness. All the lethargy in the face, in the scalp, in the neck seems to wash away with this practice. By the way, this is also very good for people who snore and who have the milder forms of sleep apnea. It helps to tone the muscles of the tongue and the upper airway dilator muscles. So in India, this is actually prescribed as a practice for people who do snore at night. So that's Brahmari, just in a nutshell for you.
That's beautiful. And you've just answered both the questions that, two of the questions that our listeners had asked. One was for sleep apnea and one was for stress. And I'm thinking two things. One is that, well, it's also for anxiety, right? Because we feel so anxious. There's so much anxiety about little things and big things. Some of it is important because, then you know that I've got to be on time somewhere. But sometimes it continues, and I think that's when it becomes stress, and can lead to distress and all kinds of ailments. So this is such a simple and an easy way of just coming into that sense that you just spoke. I can just feel it, and as I was doing it, I could feel that it's like an internal massage. It's as if it's massaging all my organs because of the hum. So, because if it's without the hum, you're still having a beautiful breath. Is there a breath which is just the same but without the humming?
Yes, and there is the Ujjayi practice where you create a different sound on the out breath. Some people tend to call it the ocean breath. It's generally done by creating the sound of, it's almost as if you were fogging your eyeglasses on the exhale. So that sound can also be done internally. It's created at the level of the vocal cords, and that's also a very peaceful vibration. But it also slows the breath down because you're providing resistance with the vibration. So that's the magic. The sound is soothing, but by creating that resistance on the exhale, the entire experience becomes one of settling. There are practices where you just do nostril breathing, alternate nostril with or without breath holding, where the breath is silent, but you also get into a breathing ratio, if you will, similar to what we did, which also creates the same kind of physiology. For some, it might be a challenge based on their nasal condition, if they have a deviated septum, or they have allergies or sinus disease or polyps. It might be more tricky to use the nose, but you can always hum, even without doing alternate nostril breathing sequences, or do the Ujjayi breathing pattern on the exhale with the mouth sealed through the nose. So there are many, many techniques, but again, they all espouse to the same value of creating a physiology of rest, but alertness at the same time. Not hypervigilance, but alertness. Clarity with peace.
Yeah, I saw that, and what I loved about your in the website, that after first you explain everything, then we do it along with you, and there's also a lot of information about each of the breaths, which we can take. So one of my questions is that if people go on to your website and they sign on to breathonance.com, then do they have to do they ask you a question, and they're guided which breaths to take, or do they self-guide themselves?
Yeah, so this is more of a repository. There are 66 capsules online on the website, which anyone can access and learn at their own pace over time. So this is a generic practice, and I've explained the yogic wisdom. I've given them the music to the track. I've given them some voiceovers to the music so as to guide them with the track. And then there's a lot of science, because that's where I come from, in terms of the safety of these practices, the validation of these practices, the relevance of these practices to disease states and to well-being. There's a capsule on the science also. But over a period of 7 to 8 weeks, you can learn this at your own pace, at your own time, and reinforce this in your life. But then if you wanted to really make it more prescriptive for you, so as opposed to a generic practice, you wanted to say target sleep, or you want to try and target arrhythmia, or you want to try and target allergies, or whatever it is, because breath permeates everything, right? Through the autonomic axis, it hits every visceral function in the body. Then there are certain things that you would do more than others, and there are certain things that you might not want to do at all. So that's when the value of a guide, a teacher, would be important. We are in the midst of actually creating an app, so that one can do it yourself once you've learned the technique. And then we're going to be offering 4 sessions every year, every quarter, just in terms of me teaching this practice online. Because yes, you have the library, but then the library becomes an active organism, a breathing organism, if you will, when there's a community. And that's my intention, is to kind of slowly build pockets of breathers across the country and across the globe, who can start to share their practice and share air.
This is very wonderful, Amit. Back in even before 2000, there was a practice called Breathe as One. So when we do this together, it will not only be that we are breathing for our own self health, but also breathing together gives that sense of community, like what we did right now when you were breathing and I was breathing along. I could feel that connection, of when the whole world breathes as one. How wonderful that would be. I want to ask you one more question. If there's any other thing on sleep apnea, any other kind of breath apart from Brahmari? You said also Ujjayi or another one for sleep
Yeah, so
apnea?
there's the Ujjayi practice that is valuable. Brahmari has more relevance with snoring and sleep apnea. Now, sleep apnea, in the traditional sense, it's closure of the upper airway during sleep. So it's an upper airway disease where somewhere between the nose and the opening of the windpipe, the airway tends to close. But the brain is sensing, the brain is watching, and it causes the body to arouse because there are perturbations in oxygen and CO2. And with every arousal, sleep is fractured, it's fragmented, which leads to consequences in the daytime. There are many reasons for sleep apnea. There's a genetic component, there's a nasal component, there's a pharyngeal component, there's a weight component. There are substances that can make sleep apnea, including alcohol and medications, make sleep apnea worse. But then there's also a component of insomnia that tends to go with sleep apnea, not just by virtue of the body waking the person up when you're snoring, but also in terms of how the brain responds to the body. And when one is in a state of hypervigilance, and that insomnia component is very strong, you can treat the sleep apnea, but the insomnia component is suddenly unmasked. And you get to be very stressed, even though you're doing well from a breath perspective for sleep apnea. So many aspects to sleep apnea. I don't want to leave the listener with just thinking that it's a physical issue. There are breath control issues that go with the brain. And this is where breathing, when you start to control it, you change it, it can help that vigilance factor, the insomnia factor, and it can re-regulate CO2, both while awake, but especially during sleep, for people who use CPAP machines or who use dental appliances to stabilize the airway when they're sleeping at night. There's a bunch of techniques that are now taught, to help tone the muscles of the upper airway, make them stronger. Myofunctional therapy is a big buzzword now in the sleep clinics. And we teach that through breathance. It's some of the posture practices, when you're toning up the tongue muscles with Simha Mudra, Jiva Mudra, you make them tight for a certain period of time. That also affects the upper airway activity when you sleep and you assume the supine state. So breath work, posture, muscle strengthening, muscle training, all have roles to play with this condition.
Okay. So I wanted to ask you one more thing, and that is about your music. What made you think of having music along with pranayama? And tell us a little bit about how you found the right mix of music, the right music.
Yeah, so this was serendipity. It was me teaching online. Couple of friends who are at the Berklee School of Music in Boston took the online course. Music as therapy is a big thing now in medicine. Not only for babies when they're being nursed in the nursery, but for doctors when they're operating, and especially relevant for people who have certain conditions, neurological conditions, where they're either devastated from a stroke or they're having struggles with balance from Parkinson's or even memory issues. And music can help soothe those connections, can help strengthen those connections, can actually help enliven those connections. by balancing emotional turbulence and strengthening those circuits that are responsible for memory. So there's a science over there, but then there's a soulful aspect to music that we all love, right? Music takes us into ourselves and it takes us out of ourselves. And when these musicians who took the course started to introduce the music to the breathwork practices, and they said, "Hey, do you want to share this with the group?" It was transformative. It was like, suddenly a 5 minute practice became, it felt like 30 seconds. It didn't feel like work anymore. And so I decided that let's try and integrate some of these rhythms with the breathwork practices, because they're both powerful in and of themselves and they're both rhythmic in nature. And if you synergize them, then maybe their power is more than just 2 plus 2. And that was the feedback that we would get consistently when people were doing this, that it was magical. When they started to do Brahmari to music, or Ujjayi to music, or Anulom Vilom to music. And so that's kind of become our recipe for teaching the naive breather, because it makes it fun also. It's happier to do. And then hopefully in time, you can use whatever you want for your musical background, your Spotify list, whatever those memories are associated with the rhythms that you grew up to or you loved, and practice breathwork to it. So it kind of becomes your own little thing. That's what we are actually co-creating now with Universal Music in India. They're very interested in partnering with us to actually create more tracks for the brand, for breathwork as a practice. So it's that's how the music element sort of happened with me. Clint Valadares, who's a friend and a partner now on the Breathonance website, he's the musician who creates these rhythms, and we have some amazing talent across the globe, not only at Berkeley but in India, which we hope to sort of use so that you can have music for the Indian diaspora, for the Latin diaspora, for the African diaspora. You can have their rhythms, which mean more to them as you're doing these 6,000-year-old breath practices.
I love that, and I love that you used my favorite word of the of this part of my life, which is co-creation. Because, sorry, my question. Okay, let me have some water first.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
For
And
this.
so that's the important thing with breath work, is that there are only two things that you need to have as crutches when you're doing breath work: is water, because it can be drying, some of these practices, and tissue paper, because when you start to move the nose, you will start to feel that there is a clearing aspect that comes. So tissue paper and water are the only things, and don't be bashful about blowing your nose or about chugging in gulps of water when you breathe. Very, very powerful.
Right. Yes, we need to remind our listeners to keep a bottle of water with you, or a glass of water when you're doing pranayama. So I wanted to ask you, what do you feel? You've already seen in medicine that things are changing, you know? Do you feel that it's easy to give this kind of teaching? What I love is that your patients themselves asked you, how can we breathe? So the question came, and so you knew that answer was there. What do other doctors, what does the general community feel about your teaching pranayam as a pulmonary doctor?
So I will tell you, there is a yearning in medicine to adopt practices like this, behavioral practices, rather than just, be prescribing drugs in a clinic or doing, procedures in a hospital. There's a yearning. I mean, we've all gone through collective hell over the last 5 years. There's been tremendous burnout in our community. People have left medicine in droves. They didn't want to be practicing the way they did. And so they want to do it not only for themselves, but they were never taught how, just like I was never taught how. And now, when I start to teach this and they start to learn this and they start to do this, they're suddenly finding applications in their own spheres of practice. the cardiologists of the world, the electrophysiologists of the world, they've reached out to me. Hey, why don't we do something on arrhythmia, atrial fibrillation? The sleep doctors of the world and I co-create. I have done some research last year with patients who are spinal cord injured, who are severed below a certain level of their spine, who have very little sensation and no movement, below the diaphragm. When you teach them Ujjayi, there's sudden coherence that starts to develop within their cardiovascular state, their breathing condition, and their emotional state of being. We published this last year. I've done some work with folks who have interstitial lung disease, people who can't breathe because their lung is fibrosing. And they, even though their lung condition may not change, there is a certain peace that goes with the practice wherein they're always, engulfed by panic and fear and the next breath. How is it going to happen? So there are many applications across the board because breath hits everything. So even though you may think that breath is only working in and out through the chest, breath works on your gut. Breath works on your heart. Breath works on your kidneys. Breath works on your joints and your sinews. It works on your cognition, your memory, your alertness. It works and hits everything. So, and people are eager now to, research this, apply this, but first, more importantly, learn this. Because in the learning of this, whenever there is, some restraint and some science that further struts it up, then I think we will move the needle in our community in medicine. But our patients are our biggest supporters. If it wasn't for them, it wouldn't force our hand literally to change the way we practice, we think, we learn, we behave, we prescribe. So they are our biggest teachers, and without them, this would not have happened for me.
So wonderful. Amit, in today's world, especially among natural healers and so-called alternative healers, the traditional healers, there's such an a feeling that maybe medical doctors, it's like as if it's another world and they just don't accept the traditional ways. In your case, you saw the traditional before you saw the modern medicine, and so it came back, and you had that you had that feeling. But you're also saying now that it's not only you, but even people who've never been exposed to these, who are open. I think this kind of dialogue is so important, because there is that's why medical doctors also must have left, because there's such a sense among people, even when they're patients, of not trusting what a medical doctor is telling them, and recently I went through some health issues, and I went through many modern medicine, I'm calling it traditional, tests. And someone asked me, "What's wrong with you?" I said, "Actually, nothing is wrong. All the tests are coming out quite well, but I'm enjoying seeing this therapy way that is also in medicine, not just giving me showing me, even because, like you saw in my throat, I was not very pleased with the way I'm speaking, with the quality of my voice, and just getting little examples from people, from the therapist, how to do all of this is so important. This kind of interconnection that's taking place. I'm so excited to hear what you said. Another thing that always has struck me is that medical doctors, especially because you all work such long hours, I mean, many of them work long hours. Sometimes it makes me wonder, do you see real life? Like, just giving an example. Sorry, I'll tell you how I mean it. Sometimes we have illnesses and they become okay without taking medication, without listening also to what our medical doctors may have told us. So do you get the sense of how what other things your patients may be doing?
Oh,
You know,
very much, very much. In fact, more and more doctors are beginning to listen to their patients. They're becoming, even though they may not know about, what some of the patients do, as long as they're doing it without harming themselves, and it's not creating, conflict with some of the treatment algorithms that they are prescribed. Doctors are more and more open to this. Even 30 years ago, it was us or them, that kind of attitude. And you don't need to vilify the other just because you don't believe in it, or you haven't done it, or it hasn't been researched. Yoga is a tradition that is 6,000 years in the making, and it's clearly outlived many other paradigms of health and well-being. People in our community are clearly more appreciative of that. Integrative medicine, complementary medicine, wellness medicine is now being sort of accepted and done, all across the country, if not the globe. And we can all co-create, coexist, share for the sake of our patients. But I'm not seeing that level of distrust that I saw, 30 years ago when I started my training. It was, this was almost quackery. It's not that anymore. And at the same time, I think, people on the other side also begin to appreciate that, the Western paradigm is valuable. It may not be complete, but it's valuable. And, if one can start to incorporate, some practices in the complementary sphere with the traditional sphere, I think we can only help each other. It's like air. We all share air, right? Whether you're a yoga teacher, whether you're a pranayama expert, whether you're a clinician, we're all breathing the same stuff. So yes, I'm hopeful that the next generation of doctors, but more importantly, healers, will start to investigate this, employ this, practice this, and learn this even in their medical curriculum.
I think this that you've just said, and I'm seeing again that how you have stepped out of the of just the hospital medical world and stepped into letting everyone share with what by making your website and and what you're proposing to do. I'm really looking forward to those conversations and those group meetings, because this is so important, because it's coming out of just that go to the doctor when you're ill, but also just be open to the science and also the ancient methods, and do it in a way which is enjoyable, which makes it more natural. Breath is natural, but somehow it has become something which it's almost as if it's not. And so I love what you're saying. So tell me, Amit, what do you think? Let me see from your point of view, because remember, I'm like, I don't know how many years older than you. What do you feel that the world, humanity, humankind is co-creating in the world today?
Unfortunately, a lot of ignorance, the way I see it, a lot of fear, which clearly conditions the way we behave and the way we treat each other, and a lot of anger, and hostility. It's unfortunate, what has happened across the globe. Obviously, sometimes natural disasters and pandemics, bring this to the surface even quicker. But as a humankind, I think we've lost our way a little bit. I'm hopeful, though, that with the next generation, and with people who are in it for the right reasons, that our innate virtue will start to sort of uncover the dust that is on the mirror, so that people can really appreciate the kindness, the compassion, the genuineness of the human condition and the human spirit. And maybe through air, through the planet, Mother Earth is crying. This is why we have all of these disasters and these pandemics. But looking after her also. But I'm hopeful that this next generation will show us the way.
Do you feel that it's also possible that when we were younger, we didn't really know what's happening and in other parts of the world? Today we get to know even more, and that's why the disasters and everything that are happening in faraway lands and even wars, we get to know. So from the news, naturally, it will always seem that things are worse. But for example, in my life, when I look around me, I feel that people are, maybe I'm in another world, I don't know, but I feel I interact with everyone. Uh, there's still so much of compassion for one another in countries and in places which we wouldn't even have known. And for example, recently when there have been wars, and one of the reasons I think people's compassion closes down or they don't speak about it is because everything becomes politicized, and you feel you have to take sides. Whereas, for example, in a war, no one is winning, everyone is losing, and because of that everyone's suffering and making us feel the world is so horrible. But at the same time, and this I'm going to say something very personal, and I hope my children won't mind, because my son, he doesn't like to be spoken of, but I remember as a child, he asked me once when Praveen and I were fighting. And he said, Mom, I'm scared that you all will divorce. I said, Why? Why do you think that? And he said, Because many of his friends recently had their parents, part. And he said that just before that, they would fight a lot. I said, Now just tell me one thing. After we fight, what is the air like? You talked about the air, and we're talking about that, Amit. What's the air like in the house? Is it clear or is it heavy? He said, It's clear. So I said, that's what Mother Earth does. That's what happens in nature. When everything gets too much, there's a storm and everything clears up. But the clearing up and the peaceful sounds and the loving sounds are very soft. It's like that in breath that you were talking about. The in breath is very soft, it's very natural. It's strange, but when I started learning pranayam, I was told to focus on my out breath. Let all the air out, close in your belly, like you were saying, and not focus on the in breath, because the in breath is natural. So it seems as if it's not there, but actually it's the in breath that's bringing life. It is the silence, the silent feeling of love, which has probably no sound. Maybe that is what we are co-creating. I'm hoping you feel the same way.
No, I would agree. I would agree completely. I mean, you can't be inspired until you expire, right? So you have to really die to the moment to be able to embrace the next one. So that's the beauty of breath, and the magic of the exhale is the seed of the inhale and vice versa. But more importantly, it's also in that space between the two, which we somehow seem to have lost connection with. And when you really get still, then everything seems at peace. Everything seems, full of compassion. And as a species, I think we've lost our way, but hopefully, practices like this, disasters like this, pandemics like this, wars like this will have within them the seed for growth and for coexistence as a species. Yes, so we are more connected with technology, certainly, but it's how do we use it? Whether it's AI or whether it's anything else, how do we use it uh, to further humankind as opposed to have it become extinct?
Yeah, that's why what I liked is that when you had us do the breath, then you said a moment of stillness and quiet, because at that time, when you're looking within, you actually start expanding out, and you get that sense of peace. And I feel you can start. It starts radiating out from you. You don't have to do it. It's just doing it. I'm really looking forward, Amit, to your calls when you'll be doing the breathings together. And Do you have anything that you would like to leave our listeners with as we come to a close of this session?
No, one, just grateful for the opportunity to speak with you, Meenakshi, and with your listeners and your audience. It's been lovely to spend some time. I would just say, spend some time in quietude every day for yourself, for your physical well-being, for more importantly, your emotional well-being in your sleep every day, in a little bit of stillness. And whatever it takes, whether it's meditation, whether it's a walk on the beach, whether it's a swim, whether it's a hike, whether it's just cuddling a little baby, or maybe doing breath work. These practices can be very powerful for all aspects of our being, but more importantly for that value within us that connects all of us together. Breathminence is just one way of me giving back, and I hope that as we become a collective sort of breathing community, that just by doing this, we will have change happen rather than shouting for change to happen or canvassing for change to happen. You just need to be the peace that you want to manifest in the world outside. You don't need to shout it. You just need to be it.
What a beautiful message. Thank you so much, Amit. I'm so grateful that you were here.
Thank you, Meenakshi.
And
Thank
my
you.
voice. And thank you, listeners, for being here.
Thank you so much for participating in this session today with Meenakshi and me. It is my intention, as I'm sure it is hers, to create a community of like-minded people who give of themselves, but who also replenish themselves with practices like this. I'm especially interested in breath as a practice, given its value for human health and happiness. Breathminence.com is the website that you can go to. But if there is an interest in the future, more than happy, more than willing to do this on a recurring basis with the co-creator circle so that we can start to expand our collective set of breathers to help ourselves and to help the world heal. Thank you.